Have you ever had something really awful happen to you? Or have you ever been with a friend who had something really awful happen to them and you're sitting there trying to think of like, what do I say to this person? Like, how do I make this any better? Um, and they look at you and they say, why would God let this happen to me? What do you say? Let's consider it. Hello, I'm Chico, and welcome to the advAnswer Apologetics, Moving Faith Forward. So this is actually a companion video to a video I did on my philosopher channel. In that channel, I look at philosophy, and part of philosophy is philosophy of religion. So I asked the question on that channel, why does God allow any evil whatsoever? And that's more of an intellectual question. That's us sitting here and looking, from a bird's eye view at suffering happening in the world and say, why would God allow this? How could God exist if suffering exists? But things happen a lot differently when we actually suffer. One of my good buddies, I remember when his wife passed away from breast cancer, it gave me my first anxiety attack. Right? I was so shocked at that could happen. He had a 5-year-old daughter. I remember talking to him and thinking, like, what the heck? I don't know. I don't even know how to make sense of this, right? I've had, friends die. I've had, I think I've said before, major anxiety attacks. I've had all kinds of crazy stuff happen in my life. And when that stuff happens, it's difficult to know what to say about it. It's, you don't want to be so cavalier as to say, well, here are some possible logical reasons for, and in fact, I would highly suggest you do not say that. So I had a friend once who had something really awful happen to him, and he called me out of the blue and asked me, why would God allow this to happen? And he told me, don't tell me God has a good and perfect plan, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to hear this, like you're going to be a better person for it kind of crap, right? And I understood, like I was not going to say that. That was the last thing I wanted to say, Also, you don't want to say stuff like, well, what did you do to bring this about? It's very clear in the Bible. In fact, the book of Job is all about how Job did nothing wrong. And yet, his friends were blaming him, and God gets mad at the friends. And I've heard pastors to this day try to find reasons why it was Job's fault. And this is a psychological, this is a well-documented, actually, psychological phenomenon where we try to find reasons why they deserved it, because that means that we're safe because we don't deserve it, right? Even though we might deserve it for whatever reason. But here's what I think. And this is not possibly for everybody. I don't know. But I was an atheist for 10 years. I became a Christian at 24 years old. I'm currently ancient, 40 years old, right? That's like, man, why are you even living, right? So I became a Christian, and I remember the experience being kind of interesting. I remember thinking before that, kind of like, I don't believe in you, God, ha ha ha, right? It was weird. Like I decided I wasn't going to believe in God, but I still kind of believed in him. In fact, I remember one time when I had my, sounds gross, I apologize, but my colon twisted one day. I had taken, I was in college, taken way too many aspirin. I'd never taken aspirin before in my life, so I didn't really know what I was doing. And I had a fever, and my dad was like, oh, you should take aspirin. It's a fever reducer. So I took a couple, and yeah, it reduced my fever, so I took a couple more, and I took about 8 aspirin in like 4 hours, which is terrible, right? My colon twisted. I went to the hospital, and I remember, I was an atheist, I remember praying to God to kill me, because it was so painful, right? So it was bizarre. Like I think that I was angry with God because I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I didn't like the fact that God had something to say about it. Right? I didn't like the fact that he would want me to do something that I didn't want to do. I think possibly when suffering happens to people and they're angry at God, I think possibly something similar is happening. Because whom are they mad at, right? Whom are you upset with if something awful happens, if not with God? So I think it could be the case that when people are suffering and they ask this question, why would God allow this to happen to me? I mean, they're asking that question, why would God himself let this happen to me? So I don't think we want to go the answer of, here are some reasons why God exists, right? That's not really the question, I think. The question is, why shouldn't I reject God right now? If he lets this kind of thing happen, why do I want to be on his team? Right? Why don't I just go do my own thing? Because clearly, he doesn't have my back, right? And if that's the question, then I think we have some answers. I definitely don't think I'm going to be able to answer it all for you, right? In fact, to go back to the book of Job, that's one of the things that happens. Job is mad at God because he doesn't understand why he's been punished. He doesn't understand why he's going through suffering. I guess he's not really being punished, but why he's going through suffering. And finally, and he says, I wish God were here, right? I'd say, what's up? And finally, God shows up and says, hey, he doesn't say, I know, Job, I understand. Look, here's why I did it. What he says is, hey, Job, were you around when I made the whole world? Were you around when I crafted life itself? No. So I know a little bit better, man. Just trust me, all right? Trust me. I got you. It's gonna look bad sometimes. It's gonna look like, why did this happen? But there are some good reasons that you just are not privy to. And I think I've experienced this myself. I remember when my son was 2 or 3, something like that. My oldest son, Sebi, he wanted to touch the oven, like the fire on the oven, and he didn't understand why Dad wouldn't let him. Right? He kept going up there to try to touch it. I mean, look at it. It looks pretty, right? It's dancing around, all fun. The closer your hand gets to it, the warmer it is. It feels so nice. And of course, he doesn't know about hands being burned. So all he knows is this feels great, and Dad won't let me do it. In fact, and I apologize, but if you're against this, but I gave him a little smack on the hand because I was afraid he was going to burn his hand. Right? So don't call the cops. It was purely because I was really nervous about him, burning his hand. But Sebi didn't really understand why I would do something like that, right? He was hurt, he was crying, but here's what he did understand. Dad knows a lot better than I do. Dad loves me, and because of that, I'm going to follow my dad, right? I'm going to trust my dad, I should say, right? And I think that's what real faith is. Faith is not, I believe that God exists. In fact, in the book of James, we hear even the devil believes God exists, right? So that's not what it is. It's putting your trust in God. That's the kind of faith that we're talking about, right? So in Job, God doesn't give him the answers to why he's suffering. I don't think we should go around telling Christians or non-Christians or anybody, hey, here's why God's letting this happen to you. But I do think there are some consolations that we can give. Number one, if God doesn't exist, then the awful thing that happened to you is no different than 2 comets colliding in space, right? It's purely accidental. It has no purpose and no meaning whatsoever. The only way that it's going to have meaning, the only way that your suffering is going to have any kind of purpose is if it's part of God's plan. So one thing we can know, and I know that, please I don't mean to be cavalier about that, right? Like, I don't want to be saying like, yeah, so, you have to believe in God for but it sucks, right? And it's not like a happy thing, like, oh, God's letting this happen, it's part of his plan, like, but at the very least, it's not just some meaningless happenstance, at the very least, it has some purpose, right? Your suffering is not going to be wasted. You know that God is going to use your suffering. In fact, one of the favorite verses of mine is God works all things to the good of those who love him, right? So whatever you're going through, you know that there is some plan. There's some point to it, right? It's not some pointless thing if God exists. If he doesn't exist, it's just the same accidental cases, I don't know, What else would be accidental? I don't know. Two planets colliding, something like that. You know what I mean? Like it's totally meaningless. Number two, we also know that if God exists, he has said to us in the Bible that this isn't it, right? This isn't the place. Oh, you're shocked that it sucks? It's supposed to suck, right? This isn't the final place. There's a place 80 years from now, right? If you're lucky, you live 80 years, where there are no more tears. There's a place where there is going to be eternal happiness. So, again, this is a consolation, right? This is not proof to why God will allow this. What I'm saying is, you're going through this suffering. You're asking, why would God do this? I don't have the answers, but I do have this one thing that you can look forward to. We have hope, right? Whereas, if God doesn't exist, there's nothing to hope in. Boy, I hope the next, few years don't suck until I stop existing. That's not a hope, right? That is a quitting. That sucks, And finally, and this is something that I can't reason towards, but if you're going through suffering, God gives you strength when you turn to him, right? I can't prove that to you. You're going to have to figure that out yourself. You're going to have to actually go to God himself and ask for the strength. You can't just be like, hey, God, prove to me you're there. Give me strength, right? That doesn't work. Instead, when you go to God sincerely and, in the name of Christ and ask, God, I need help, please get me out of this. It's not like it's not going to magically, oh, everything is great now. But he will get you through those suffering times. And I know from experience, plenty of people will say the same. I would not have made it had not God been there. So yeah, those are three consolations, I think, for when you are suffering or when a friend of yours is suffering. I do want to say one last thing. A lot of people wonder, what do I say to a person when these things are happening? And you probably are not going to open with this, right? When somebody is suffering, something awful happened, the number one thing I can say to you is just to be there, right? Just to suffer with them, right? To be in the suffering with them, to be a shoulder to cry on, not to explain to them, well, here's why everything makes sense. That doesn't help at all. You want to love that person. You want to be there for that person and be whatever you can for that person. And in walking with them, I think you help to bring them through the other side. You got to understand that suffering is momentary, right? It's not always going to be this way. So we don't necessarily need to solve it right now, right? What we need to do is to be with people who are suffering. And then, when these questions arise, and I think you're able to offer these consolations, and that shows why somebody would want to turn to God. Anyway, that's all that I have. If you have more questions about this specific topic, please feel free to comment below. If you have any questions about the faith at all, please comment. Also, like, subscribe, comment, and tag a friend so that they can join the conversation. That's all I got. Adios.